Welcome to the Freshman Foundation Podcast, helping you make the jump from high school athletics to the collegiate level and beyond, with your host, Michael Huber.
So, how has Noah Luskus used a growth mindset to become a nationally ranked collegiate spikeball athlete? Many high school athletes retire from competitive sport before entering college simply because they are forced to do so. However, my guest on episode 22, Noah Luskus, chose to forego swimming competitively in college. Instead, Noah enrolled at his dream school, the University of Georgia, as a student. As a freshman, Noah found spikeball, which started as a hobby and turned into a competitive passion after much hard work and dedication. Noah discusses his choice not to swim competitively in college and how he has found purpose in pursuing a new athletic endeavor. His efforts have led to a flourishing Spikeball Club at UGA that has won multiple national championships. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's build your foundation with Noah Luskus. Hey, Noah, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. For those who are listening here, can you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Noah Luskus, and I am currently a professional spikeball player. I grew up not playing spikeball because it wasn't a thing that existed. But I was actually a competitive swimmer for my whole life. I started competitively swimming at the age of 6 and did it through the end of high school. And then kind of transitioned into spikeball when I found the club team at UGA when I was a freshman there back in 2017.
Yeah, for those of you who may not know, UGA is the University of Georgia.
Go Dogs. Sorry. Yeah, go Dogs.
That's okay.
Yeah, I forget that people outside the South don't know what UGA always stands for.
I knew exactly what you meant. I just wanted to make sure everybody sort of knew what that was.
Absolutely.
Because us Northerners don't always assume things about the South correctly. So interestingly enough, I was checking out your Twitter feed, and I'm not here to play gotcha. But I saw that you recently retweeted an Andrew McCutcheon tweet, and it said that he posted that he would never give up on himself despite what other people might think or do. So I was just curious, like, what resonated about that tweet with you?
I think I just kind of liked it because I think that's kind of like a mentality that I've always had. Like I've never been somebody who like really cares about what other people think as much as you can. I mean, I think there's a certain human nature to caring about what other people's opinions are. But I've always been somebody who has loved when somebody else has told me I can't do something. I've always been somebody who I would love it if you told me you can't run through a brick wall, and then I would go after it and try to do it to prove you wrong. And I saw that tweet, and I think it was actually in the middle of a series they were playing the Braves too, which made me mad because they beat the Braves when he tweeted it.
Right.
But but it definitely like resonated with the kind of mentality that I have always taken towards sports.
So, okay. So with that in mind, so I would imagine that you probably got some of those kinds of comments or some of that feedback when people kind of started to learn about your interest and your kind of involvement in spikeball. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, it's definitely fair. And like on one token, you have like family and friends who like don't like really know what spikeball is, or like know what spikeball is, like the product, but like don't know it's a competitive thing. And whether that was my girlfriend or my parents or siblings or friends, and they're like, "What is this? This is like so stupid. Like, why are you wasting your time? Like, why are you taking this so seriously? Like, you could be doing better things with your time." And honestly, even now, like 4 or 5 years later, where competitive spikeball is such a more well-known thing, and where it's like a lot bigger than it was when I first started playing, like I still get the comments. And then like on the side of like people who like played round net, like or play spikeball or round net, those terms are kind of synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
In the community we refer to as round net. So if that's what I say, it's the same thing as spikeball. There's always been haters, there's always been doubters, always people who tell you can't be something, or tell you you're not good enough to do this or that. And so I think that was really what kind of resonated with me with tweet is really like, people saying like, oh, you'll never be this good, or you're bad, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No, I relate to that myself as well. So I liked it. I thought it was great. I was just curious as to what sort of what was behind it. So you mentioned that you were a competitive swimmer. Could you just talk about what that sort of looked like when you started, and sort of how you kind of came up, through your youth and adolescent years?
Yeah, absolutely. Swimming was probably like the only sport that I ever did when I was little that I was like really good at when I started. Like I played a lot of sports. Like I played soccer and basketball, and baseball. And baseball was probably the other one that I took the most seriously outside of swimming. But all those other ones, I was pretty bad when I started, and like really kind of like gradually got better, like slowly over time. But swimming, I was something that I was just really, really good at right off the bat. I started when I was like 6, and I just started doing my like neighborhood summer league swim team. And the reason I wanted to do it was because like the swim team got to go to the pool before like the pool opened to just the rest of the neighborhood. So I was like, my friends are gonna be so jealous. I get to go to the pool like 2 weeks early. And it was something I was really good at. It was something I was like really good at probably like up until the age I was like 10, 11. And then I kind of hit a weird period of time there where, dudes are going through puberty or whatever. And I wasn't. And I started putting on like a lot of weight. Like I got pretty big. Like I've never been like a big guy, especially not as a kid. I was really tiny. I put on all this weight when I was like 11, and swimming got really, really hard. And I was getting like not faster. Like I went for like a whole like year and a half where like I didn't drop time in a single race. And that's like the time when all these other people that are my age are they're like shooting up. They're like getting taller. They're getting way faster. Like they're getting big. And I just wasn't. And that was like a super frustrating like year, honestly, probably close to 2 years of just like going through that. And I almost quit. The only reason I really didn't quit is because my parents lied to me and said that they had signed me up for one more month. And then I had to finish it out because I had already paid for it, even though they were just trying to get me to stick with it. Because it's something that I had done like for 5 or 6 years up until that point. And then it was like it was like they did like 2 or 3 times, like, oh man, I already paid for this other month. Like you got to stick it out. And eventually I just kind of got to the point where I did kind of break through and start dropping time again. And I changed pools and coaches, and that was certainly part of it. And I kind of got back, like, I don't want to say on track, because I don't think I ever got back to like comparatively where I was as good as I was when I was younger. But certainly got to where I was respectable or could have done it at the Division I level had I chose to do it. Interesting.
So when did your parents tell you that they made that story up to keep you going?
Gosh, I think the first time I really talked about it was honestly probably recently, but I think I kind of realized what had happened when I was older. Like, I mean, I was like 11. And like by the time I was like really like probably like invested in swimming, I was like 16, 17, and like looking at and thinking about swimming in college, I was like, man, like they definitely didn't just pay for another month. I was like, they definitely were just pulling a fast one on me. But I'm glad I did it. You know, I wanted to quit and play other sports because I was going through a hard time, and I was a kid. And you know, I'm glad that they kind of had the foresight to be like, he's really going to kick himself if he gives up on this just because he's going through a rough stretch, and because of a lot of things that were not necessarily like in my control.
Yeah. And it seems like it was a great experience for you in the sense that you were able to persevere through a tough time, which it sounds like a lot of it was simply just biology, right? That is out of your control to a certain degree as you're going through puberty, and you kind of stuck it out and then went on to swim for another 3, 4, 5 years through high school. So that's pretty cool that you're able to stick it out. So as you're going through high school, sort of, what are you thinking about your swimming career? You know, as you're a high school swimmer, like sort of what would talk me through kind of what it was like as your 9th, 10th, 11th grade, what you're thinking about maybe, I'm going to, think about competing at the next level in college.
Yeah. I think, the goal for me always was to swim at UGA or Georgia. It was always a goal from when I was little. My parents both went to Georgia. My grandparents went to Georgia. Honestly, like my mom's entire side of the family went to Georgia. I grew up going to football games there. My family had season tickets. Grew up taking trips to Athens. We lived like 45 minutes away through middle school. So it was just always where I wanted to go. It was my dream school. So it was always kind of the goal. And I busted my butt to do it. I worked really hard to get to that point. And I mean, I got to probably a certain point around junior year of high school when I don't want to say I realized it, but it kind of like was becoming more and more apparent that I wasn't quite fast enough. I was close enough to maybe kind of stretch a walk on. I mean, not quite fast enough, obviously. But then it became a kind of a question from maybe middle of junior year about what I really want to do. Do I want to go to Georgia because it's a school that I've always wanted to go to, or do I want to swim at like a smaller Division I school? And, I took recruiting trips and I talked to coaches when I was eligible through like NCAA guidelines starting like junior year, through like the first half of my senior year. And I mean, obviously I ultimately decided against it, but definitely probably the hardest thing that I've ever done to this point in my life was that like kind of stretch middle of first semester senior year when I was like really becoming apparent that I wasn't going to decide to continue swimming just because swimming was something that was such a big part of my life and such a big part of like what I identified as. It was a real mental struggle, and it's something that it definitely didn't stop when I made the decision to quit swimming. But there's definitely a hard time for me for sure.
So how long would you say that sort of extended on, right? From that first part of your senior year, obviously you're wrestling with the decision. At some point that year, you make the decision to move forward, but it still sort of hangs around with you. Like, how long did it take you to sort of like just accept or get past the fact that like it was going to just not be a part of your past and not part of what you were doing right then or in the future?
I mean, I don't know like exactly probably when, but I mean, it took multiple years. Well, probably I would think the time when it really kind of like started being something that I could kind of fully accept was honestly probably like the beginning of second semester of my sophomore year of college. And a lot of that had to do with Spikeball and like what I was becoming with Spikeball. But I don't know. My freshman year, even though I was getting involved in Spikeball and other things at school, it was really hard. And honestly, probably that like stretch of whatever that is, almost 2 years, was probably the hardest time in my life. I don't think mentally I was in like a super good place. And honestly, it's not something that I think I've ever really talked about with anybody, to be honest with you. I'm not really somebody who particularly enjoys like talking about my feelings. So it's something that I kind of bottled up to myself, but it was a low point for me because I think that so much of what I define my self-worth as was with success in the pool, because it was the only thing that I had ever really done and worked hard at. I mean, obviously I did school stuff and I always did very well academically with like a fairly minimal amount of effort. And I say that not to like brag. It's just, I was always very academically gifted, and I am super fortunate to have parents who place such a high emphasis on my academics from a young age. And swimming gave me such great time management skills, I think, that I was able to pretty easily handle school. And it wasn't something that I think I ever felt like a great sense of pride in when I did well in. But when I did well in swimming, that's what I felt pride in. And that's, like I said, it's what I associated being a success or being a failure in. And I spent, like I said, that year and a half, 2 years after deciding to quit, feeling almost like a failure, I want to say, is how I think I perceived it at the time. It's certainly not how I perceive it anymore. But I felt like a failure because of so much. Like I had this goal, like I said, from the time I was 6 to swim at Georgia or to swim at the next level and continue on. And I didn't, and I ultimately came up short. And like I said, I don't frame that as a failure anymore, because I think that's a poor way of looking at it. But in that short of time, it's what I did. And I definitely struggled mentally because of it.
Well, I mean, first of all, let me say I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, listen, every athlete's competitive run comes to an end. And that's a big part of like what this podcast is about, is understanding that, our identities a lot of times are so wrapped up in athletics, right? And maybe some people go on to participate at the intercollegiate level and compete. But at some point that run's going to end. And I think those feelings that you just described are, I think, very common. And I've talked to other people on this podcast about that transition out of sport, whenever it is for them, being really, really hard. And I think it's just natural. And so I wanted to ask you about the good parts or the benefits maybe of not competing anymore. Like when you got to college, obviously you weren't associating as being a swimmer, but like, was there anything that was positive that came out of saying, oh, wow, not swimming, I have this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, initially I think the big thing was just like, I felt like I had so much free time. I felt like I was like, man, I have time to have fun. Cause in like high school, it was never like, like whether it was like parties or whatever it was, like wasn't really something that I was involved in high school, because it was like Friday night, like, man, I have practice at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Like I'm not going out and doing something. I'm going to bed. So I think I was honestly, it's kind of like a shell shock. Like, man, I've got so much free time and I can like do whatever I want and like, or, have fun or like just honestly be normal. And then obviously like the opportunity to kind of just expand out and do something new. Like swimming was such a big part of my life, obviously. And it was like all that I did. So like to be able to kind of extend out of my comfort zone was obviously uncomfortable. But definitely something that was positive, just try to find like, a different thing to be a part of, a different group of people to be involved with. But honestly, maybe a lot of that's me looking back on it now with a different perspective. I think that I definitely probably weighed more negatives than positives. Initially, but like I said, the free time was definitely, I always loved it when I was having the free time and I wasn't sitting there thinking about swimming.
Yeah. Do you feel like your free time worked to your advantage? I guess meaning like, were there instances where your free time maybe was a hindrance more than a help?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you start thinking about like, man, I should be swimming right now, it's kind of like, it's almost like a depressing feeling. And I think for me, it was never like during the days that I really felt like that way, like overcome with like, whether you want to call it like a depression or a sadness or like a sense of failure, because I was always doing something during the days. Like I started working out, like I started taking like weightlifting seriously. And like I was involved in Spikeball, like not nearly as seriously as I am now. And like just doing whatever, like hang out. But for me, I think it was mostly like at nights. I think that's when I really struggled with it. It was like laying in bed and I was like, man, I was like, I don't know. There's so much time to reflect, I think, when you just lay down to go to bed at night and just about anything. And I think that's always kind of when it hit me the hardest is like, man, like this sucks. Like I said, I felt like a failure. I was like, and you just beat myself up about it and you're just laying there and then you don't sleep. And then it becomes like this vicious cycle. So,
yeah, well, I've been there too.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that. So tell me about Spikeball. So like, what was it like when you got into it? Sort of like paint the picture for me. Like when you found it, what did that look like?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I found it, the way I found it was I just saw a flyer in the dining hall. It was like UGA, like Spikeball Club. And I was like, man, this is cool. Like I played Spikeball on the beach or like in gym class in high school. I was like, oh man, I'm pretty good at this. Like I'll go out and just be a bunch of dudes like hanging out, playing Spikeball. Like I thought it was just gonna be a friend group. I was like, oh, we're just like hanging out playing Spikeball. It's just like an excuse for us to like do whatever and make friends. And I show up and it's like this super competitive thing. And it like blew my mind how good these people were. And I showed up and I got humbled very quickly. I don't think I won a game. The first time I came out and played pickup with everybody, it was crazy to me. I was like, I suck. I was like, I'm good. Like I was always like one of like the better people in my friend group in high school when we were playing around. Like I didn't even know the rules when we showed up to play competitively. So it was just unbelievable to me how competitive it was and how seriously people took it. And now I'm one of those people. So I guess it's kind of ironic looking back.
Well, it's interesting because the first time we talked, you sort of told me the same thing, right? Like how humbling it was, how difficult it was when you first started playing with the club. And interestingly enough, I went out on the beach a couple weekends ago with my son, who's not just about 13, and he played with me. And I was like, oh my goodness. He's like showing me the rules. Like you can hit it up to yourself. You could do this. You can't do this. I was like, oh my God, this is hard. I'm like, I have to practice a lot to beat him.
Yeah.
It's kind of embarrassing. So I started to experience it on my own. But tell me about, I mean, clearly you're at a point now where you're playing professionally. You started out sort of at the bottom, bottom rung of the ladder. What was sort of your motivation to get better at it? Like how did that work? How did you go through the process of learning how to play and get better?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I think I have to credit the people at Georgia, and specifically the founder of our club team, Ben Landez, at UGA. Like, did a great job with all of us when he was the president of the team, and he actually is coaching now. And he's such a big reason for the reason that I'm successful currently. But I think like what motivated me was that I was just really, really bad. Like when I first started playing, I was bad. And I continued to be bad like for a couple of months. And honestly, I was going to quit. Like I just wasn't super enjoying the sport. Like I had fun, like hanging out or whatever, like with the people, like people were good. But I wasn't getting super close with them. Like everybody that was my age kind of came in with a friend. Like they came in with a roommate or they came in with a friend from high school. Or they met somebody and they like joined together. So, and I didn't. So I was kind of always like, I felt like the odd man out initially, like on the team, like everybody had somebody they were close to. And I was just like there, and they like hung out like and did social stuff, and I like didn't really go because I didn't like super fit in. So I was going to quit, but I had already committed to playing in our college sectional, which was in Athens in like October of 2017. And I was like, well, I'm not going to bail on this guy that I'm supposed to play with. Like that would be like pretty messed up of me. Like I'm not going to do that to him. And I was like, man, we'll come out and we'll do okay. Like we'll win a couple games, we'll win a couple series, like, and then I'll tell him I don't want to do it anymore. But we came out and we didn't win a game the entire day. We didn't win a single game the entire day. And I left, and man, it was just my pride. I was like, I can't be bad at this. And I think a lot of that was because I was in such a poor mental state about swimming. I was like, I can't be bad at something else. I was like, I can't quit something else and not be good at it. And I just started busting my butt to get good at it. And it certainly wasn't like an overnight fix. It wasn't like, man, I'm going to get good now that I've got beat. It was a really long process. It was a really, really long grind. And anybody who is involved in the community or in the sport that knows me could tell you that, because I was really bad and I had a lot of bad performances and I had a lot of bad results for years. And it's just been a real slow grind to get better. And I think back to that first tournament a lot. And I think back to like swimming a lot when I practice for this stuff. I mean, that is what motivates me to want to be really good at this.
Yeah. Well, what that kind of says to me is that you really are somebody that does have a growth mindset, because it would have been really easy to say, I suck at this. Like, I'm just going to bail, because you had nothing invested in it. Right. When you started, like you could have just walked away and nobody would have been the wiser, but you challenged yourself to get better at something that you weren't good at. And I think that's really important. I think that's really important to kind of point that out, because, you go from the kind of, I'm terrible at this. And rather than just sort of listening to that voice, you said, you know what, I'm terrible at this, but I'm going to get better. And you put the work in to get better. So what are some of the skills that go into being a good spikeball player?
Yeah, I think the first thing, like the biggest thing that anybody that plays competitively is going to tell you is serving is such a big skill. It's definitely like the dominant part of the game. I don't want to say it's the most important, because I don't necessarily believe that. The majority of people would tell you that it's the most important skill. But just grinding serves and being able to create pressure with your serves is so important, because offense or like hitting, like receiving the serve and then receive set spike, is very overpowered in the game currently, and it probably always will be in a game where you can hit a ball 360 degrees where there's only two people defending. So the ability to create pressure on a serve to force a bad first touch or a bad serve receive, whatever you want to call it, is huge. Because if I can create a bad serve receiver, get an ace, like that's the easiest way for me to get a break. As opposed to playing defense, like I said, 360 degrees with two people. There's a lot of points where there's nothing you're going to be able to do. So grinding that, and then hitting, like I said, hitting is big. We talk about how easy offense is, but offense isn't easy unless you're a good hitter around the net. Like if you can't put the ball away, like a team doesn't have to have good serves to be able to get breaks on you, because they can get you on defense. And then setting, ball control, I kind of lump ball control into like setting and serve receive, like being able to control the ball. Like that to me is the most important skill. And I don't think maybe a lot of other people in the sport would agree. But if I can serve receive well and I can set well and I can just play clean with my partner, then it's really hard to lose. And when I taught people at UGA these past couple of years as a captain, I tell them, man, I think everybody thinks a lot about serving because it's, like I said, it's so flat. It's the flashy part of the game. It's like, oh, you got the super cool ace or the highlight reel moment. But I was like, if you just don't get broken, if you just, and a break in spikeball would be when you're serving. It's not like tennis where you're not serving is a break. Breaks in spikeball are when you're serving. I should preface that to make sense because a lot of people get confused by that. But if I just don't get broken in a game, I was like, man, any idiot can stumble into 2 breaks. Anybody can make their opponent get broken twice. Your opponent's probably going to mess up 2 times a game. So if you just don't get broken, that's all you need to win. You need 2 breaks and then you win 21-19. So it's like, if you guys just focus on being really clean and having good control of the ball, like you'll go so much farther than if you focus on being this super crazy server or an amazing hitter.
Yeah, I mean, to me, having been exposed to it at a very, very, very novice level, it would seem to me that the hand-eye coordination piece of it is huge, right? The focus it takes to hit the ball on the right angle at a certain velocity to generate enough force to get the ball off is something that is probably not something we could do overnight, right? Like you have to practice and get better at it. Do you have any sense of like how fast or like what the velocity is on some of the like the hardest hitters that you play against? I'm just curious.
On serves, man, I want to say, to be honest with you, I am one of the hardest like hitters on serves in this sport. I wouldn't say the hardest. I would definitely say like in the top 5 or 10. I would say it's probably coming off serve, probably somewhere between 50 and 60 miles an hour would be the hardest. And then like hits are probably similar, maybe a little bit slower just because you're not necessarily generating as much torque with the rest of your body when you're hitting as when you're serving.
Yeah, that's super fast, right? So like that's like takes a serious amount of hand-eye coordination and focus to return a serve that's coming at you that quickly on an angle that you're not sure how that thing's going to bounce off the net. So it's really, really hard, right? So it sounds like it takes a long time to develop the skills, right? When you started from the freshman year, right? How long did it take you to get to a point where you felt like, okay, like I got the physical side of this game down, meaning like I've got all sort of the basic movements. I feel like it's automatic. It's not like me thinking about mechanics or something like that.
Man, I don't know, because I still think like to some extent, like today, like I think about mechanics. Like if and maybe that's because I'm like a very like, I don't want to say like very technical player, but I think I have a pretty good like mental understanding of the game. So like, I think I analyze what I do like in game a lot, like especially with serving. If I'm like missing serves, I'm like, okay, what am I doing? Is it the toss? Okay, no, my toss is like good. It's where I want it. Is it the way that I'm following through my swing? Like, okay, I'm doing that. Like, okay, maybe it's my stance. Like, how am I setting my feet? Like, how is my weight distributed? It's like basics. Like, I don't know. For me, it probably took longer than most people. Like I said, I've never been somebody who is super great. Like, it's picking up a new thing right away. Maybe to be like just borderline like basic comfortable, 2 years maybe, to be honest with you, where I was like, okay, like, and even then like serve receive, like footwork was really, really sloppy. I didn't have a lot of control of the ball. Like I couldn't set very well. I got to talk about, I think it's the most important skill. Like I feel like I've just kind of gotten to the point over the last, maybe honestly like 6 months to a year where I'm like, okay, like I'm a good setter. Like I feel like I can control this ball no matter where I'm setting it from, or I can line up across from somebody serving at me and I can control what it's doing, or I have good footwork to be able to like put myself in a position to get the ball. So it's ever developing. And maybe that's just because as you keep developing, you keep going up against better players. So maybe it feels like it's longer than it is because like, oh, you master like playing at one level and then like, boop, you get better and you're playing against better people. And then like, you're like, what do I do? Because they're so much better than what you're playing against before.
Yeah. And that concept applies in all sports, right? Like we go from high school athletes go to college and they're the the stars of their team. They're all state, they're whatever. And then they show up in college and they're just like everybody else, right? So then you have to continue to put the work in to elevate your game relative to your peers. So that's not surprising to me at all. I mean, I think what I was sort of building up to was the mental side of it, right? Because that's sort of my area of interest, right? Because when I think about learning skills, in scientific research, we learn skills in a very mechanical way early on because we don't know what we're doing. But at a certain point, it becomes much more automatic because our brain understands what it needs to do. And there's not as much internal thinking about the mechanics of it, right? You're always trying to get better, but your body just does certain things automatically, right? So then it becomes more mental. Right. So talk to me about the mental side. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, when we first spoke. Like, tell me about the mental side of playing in a spike ball game where you're going, how many points is in a game?
So you're playing to 21, win by 2. So typical game's probably going to be 35 to 40 points probably. But I mean, I've had games that have gone that I've won or lost in the 40s. So you play 3 games in one almost. But typically, you're probably playing about 35 to 40 points. And mentally, I think honestly, it's pretty challenging. And I'm super fortunate to have a background in swimming, which is a weird thing to say because no physical skills translate over, to be honest, outside of maybe endurance. Nothing physical translates over from swimming. It's not like a tennis or a volleyball or something where movements are similar. But swimming is such a mentally dependent sport, and you just have got to be so mentally sharp from swimming. And that's something I think I've realized over the past couple of years is how much I've really taken away from that and how much it helps me in everything I do in life, but specifically spike ball. But spike ball can be so mental because there are just days when you go out and there's days when you go out and you have your ace stuff. I mean, just like any sport, you've got your best stuff. You have your best pitch or your shot is on or your golf swing is there or whatever it is. And you just have days and you're on fire and everything's automatic, like you talk about, and you're just better than everybody because you're having one of those days. But man, there are a lot of days when you go out there, and I played pickup today, and it was one of those days, and it's man, nothing is working. I can't get a serve on the net. I feel like I'm not controlling the ball quite like I should, and it becomes a grind. And I think mentally is kind of what makes or breaks players at the very top level when you get in these tournaments where you're playing super competitive games all weekend, because the big tournaments are 2 days now. So you're going Saturday and Sunday of playing all elite competition. And if something's not working, you've got to figure out a way to make it click immediately, or to be able to to kind of make it to where it's not a big deal for you. And I think the best example I have of that is serving. Serving, if you're not serving well, I think a lot of people let it affect the rest of their game. Because I said to you, serving is it's the flashy part. It's the part that everybody wants to be good at. It's the part that comes with all the glory or all the clout, or whatever it is. And if you're not having a good serving day, I think it's really easy to get sloppy with your serve receive. Man, I didn't hit a serve, and you get served to, and then you get aced by a serve you shouldn't get aced by because you didn't have your footwork, or you didn't have your hands up, or you just weren't mentally locked in. Or the same thing with any other aspect. You whiffed a hit, or you had a bad set, or you made a poor defensive rotation because you're sitting there and you're thinking about what went wrong before. And the ability to let that go is huge. I mean, there are games that I've played in where I've been beat by my own mental, and there are games I've played where people that I've played against have beat themselves. They didn't even give themselves a chance. And it can be more than just serving. It can be you get aced by whatever. You get aced 2 or 3 times by good serves, and you're man, I suck. And then you just beat yourself to hell, and you're never going to come back from that. So the ability to mentally just be locked in and put 1 point behind you. Like I said, you play 35, 40 in a game, and you play 15, 20 games a day. 1 point is nothing. So if you can just put it behind you, you'll do so much better.
So you play. So the games can go to 30 to 40 points. So how long does a game take?
Yeah. So you're playing 21 to 21 points for one team, but if you're counting all the points, normally normal scores are normally 21. I would say normally 21, 15 to 19 is probably your most common range. Obviously, you have ones that go into extras and you play more points, and you have ones that are blowouts. So games normally take like, I'd say like 20 minutes a piece. But like I said, it just depends on the pace of play a lot. Some players like to play fast, some players like to play slow. And I think that's actually a pretty big part of the game, is being able to control pace. And a lot of that is mentally understanding at what tempo you play best at also. So like for me, like I'm somebody who very much likes to play like at a slow tempo. Like I prefer to be methodical. Like when I have the ball serving, like sometimes I'll just like kind of like take a step away for a minute and really just like take a deep breath and kind of like lock into like what I need to do good. But I've played with and against people who like to get the ball in their hand, and they want it out of their hand in like the next like 3 seconds. Like they just want to go so fast. And maybe that's just because mentally they feel like they're ready to go. Like they want to get it done with. They don't want to sit there and think about it. And controlling the pace of the game is huge. I think I've lost a lot of games because people play too fast, and I've won games because I slowed down people that want to play fast.
Right. Well, it's like a pitcher in baseball, right? It controls the tempo, right? Some guys work really fast, some guys work slow. It's whatever works for you, right? But you've got to be comfortable with that pacing. I mean, the thing I think about is focus, right? How do you maintain your focus through the course of a 30 or 40 point game, where it's not like some sports where you're on a team where there's 5, 8, 10 guys. Like it's you and your partner, and like you're in every point, right? So you have to constantly maintain focus and not lose that attention, not lose your attention to what's going on in the moment. And I would think that that's really, really hard to do, especially when you're not playing well.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're not playing well, and it just feels like, because it's so easy. Like I know that's like games are like long and they take long, but like, man, if you're not playing well, points go by like that. They just pop off, and you can find yourself losing 3, 4, 5 points in a row. Like it's nothing. You'd be like, man, where did that go? Yeah, it's definitely a big part of the game.
Yeah, I talk to athletes about that all the time, regardless of sport, right? If your head's up your butt, for even 2, 3, 5 minutes, right? Like the world passes you by, and next thing you know, right, you've just gotten, spun around like a top, and then you realize like what happened, right? So like keeping present moment focus is really, really important in all sports. I have one more question just in general, right? So you mentioned sort of the what a day might look like, right? Play 15 games in a day. Like talk about two parts. One, can you talk about the physical demands of it endurance wise in terms of conditioning? And 2, can you talk about like just sort of like how much time you would put in to practicing and conditioning for Spikeball in a week, just like in a normal week?
Yeah, absolutely. Starting with tournaments, they're so physically demanding. And the big tour series, which is like the big circuit, which people would call like the season, is over the summer. So first of all, it's so hot. It's so hot. And also those tournaments are 2 days now. So the way that it works is you'll have, for the highest division, you'll have pool play on Saturday. And the way pool play works is they try to make it to where there's 4 teams in each pool. Obviously, it depends on the number of teams that come out. If it's divisible by 4, that's like their ideal scenario. And you'll play a series, so a best 2 out of 3 series against every other team in your pool. So that could be like 9 games just there. And then you'll play, after pool play, they seed the bracket. So the top 2 teams in each pool of 4 will go to the pro bracket, and the bottom 2 teams will go to the premier bracket. And then you'll play bracket play after that until they get to the semis. And then on Sunday, you'll do the semifinals and the finals. So Saturdays can be like really long. Like I said, you can play like close to 15 games. Or if you have like a smaller independent tournament where you're doing all pool play and all of bracket play in a day, like you could be playing north of 20 games, like easily if you go to 3 a lot. So, they are long days, and I found playing on Sundays, I am sore. I'm sore through my lower back. I'm sore through my hips, sore through the legs. And maybe part of that is because I work out the days before the tournaments. So, and like shoulders and backs and whatever it is, it's definitely like more physically demanding than people would think. Like I said earlier, like I think a lot of people think like, this is just a joke. This is just Spikeball. This is just like a fun beach game. But you go out there and play from 9 to 5 or whatever it is, or even if it's just 9 to 3, like you're playing 6-8 hours in a row and you're out in the sun and it's hot. It's physically demanding. And then in terms of what I do to condition, I put in a lot of hours. I probably put in an hour and a half in the gym 6 times a week. So that's, I would say probably on a week, I probably average about 8 hours in the gym, maybe. And then I normally play pickup for, I'd say 3 or 4 times a week for about 2 hours. So that's another 8 hours. And then I do hitting and serving practice when I can find space. It's a little bit tougher now that I'm in an apartment instead of my parents' basement. I have a little less space. But that, when I was at home before I moved into my apartment a couple weeks ago, after pickup, I would come back and I would hit spikes and work on spikes for a half hour. And then I would serve for another hour, like 3 times a week. So, I probably put in close to 20 hours a week in terms of just overall like physical conditioning, which I count as going like towards spikeball. Like that's what's driving a lot of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in essence, right, like just because it's a club sport and not an intercollegiate sport, you're still a student athlete, right? You're still putting in an immense amount of time every week working on your game, working on the things that you have to do to get better. So with that in mind, like as a student athlete, like what were the biggest challenges for you? Like once you really got into the spike ball and you were putting in this time, like what would you say were the biggest challenges for you as a student athlete?
Gotcha. The biggest challenges probably for me is the fact that we had to like run our team, and like administratively, like we were the ones taking care of that because it was like an official club sport at Georgia. So we had like meetings and we have like stuff that we have to do for our club sports department. And those guys, they were great, but they're also strict and there's a lot of stuff we have to do. And there's a lot of very specific processes that we go through with them. And then going to that, and we go to like practices, which we had twice a week, or we go to like pickups, which we host on our non-practice days. There's a big balance between like how much time are we putting in towards ourselves, like as like top level players in this club, and how are we getting better so that we're making the club better through our own performance, but also how much time are we putting into new people that are coming in, or people that have been here that maybe are a lower tier. When you don't have a lot of time, when you get 3 or 4 hours of official club practice a week, like how much time is going to yourself and how much time is going to everybody else, and how do we balance that to what's best for our goals as a team competing for national championship. And then just like making those decisions. We're 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids. We're trying to like make these decisions. It's not like you said, an intercollegiate sport where you have a coach and you have an athletic department. And then also when you have those things, you have trainers and you have medics and you have people that are constantly making sure you're feeling good and performing your best. And when it's a club sport, those things are all on me. I don't get to go do lifts with a weightlifting coach, and we don't have nutritionists that are telling us how to eat for peak performance. Those are things that we're not only having to come up with on our own, but also things that you have to execute on your own. And it's a lot harder when you don't have a coach or somebody in your ear being like, hey, you're not going to do good if you do this. And trying to be that presence for yourself, but also for the rest of the team, and passing on the information, like how important that stuff is to younger people or newer people who may not necessarily like think that like spikeball is a thing they need to take that seriously.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like you put in an awful amount of effort, right? Motivation, and there's nobody telling you what to do. So not only are you practicing and working on your own game and putting in the time you discussed, you've got your classes, right? Your academics, but you're also effectively, you have a job, right? An administrative job that goes on top of it, running the club, making choices, which I imagine was really hard and challenging at times, but I'm guessing it was also probably really valuable, right? In terms of learning lessons about how to run a business, right? It's not a business in the traditional sense, but you've got a budget and you've got choices to make and you've got to deal with administration, I'm sure. So with that in mind, like what was the most rewarding part of being a student athlete, particularly a non-traditional one who wasn't kind of running through an intercollegiate, setting?
Yeah, I think the most rewarding part is probably just seeing like us grow as a team, and then seeing, like I said, newer people grow. And then, seeing personal growth is great for me as an individual. And obviously I love that. But seeing our team grow twice to the point where we were able to win a national championship in 2019, and then again this past year in 2021, to be able to grow from where we started, and to be able to kind of have an outside perspective on both of those years, as being like, man, if you look back in August, like, we were not this good. And like April, May rolls around, and you're like, man, what we have like done and what we have accomplished together, and getting an entire group of 30 college age kids to kind of buy into what we're doing, and see the process, and trust in us to lead them to a point that at the beginning of the year may not even be something they care about. If they're new, like people come in, they don't think about like winning a national championship. They think like this can be a fun thing for them to make friends. And to see that growth, it's super rewarding, especially this past year. Because I was a president of the club and I was a captain. And obviously just a really challenging year, dealing with COVID and all kinds of things. And it was wild on all fronts. It was crazy for everybody. There's always something going wrong this whole year. And being able to pull together as a team in April when restrictions started happening, and be able to win a national championship for the school that I've always loved. Super rewarding. A super proud moment for me, for sure.
Congratulations. That's awesome. And I probably could or should have mentioned this at the outset, but the way that I got connected to Noah was that I saw him on ESPN playing in a major tournament on, I think it was a collegiate, right? It was like the collegiate tournament. And I reached out to him, and I just thought that was so cool. I mean, it's not only a testament to what you guys did, but just a testament to anybody who's involved in that sport, to take it from something that's kind of just a regular old beach game to something that's on TV and that has stakes, and is really, really cool to see something like that grow and flourish in our country. So there's a lot of credit due there. Just a few more questions. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, and I know based upon what you were saying when we started talking earlier about sort of just reflecting on your swimming career, I know that was a little bit challenging for you, but have you ever thought about how your college life would have been different if you would have decided to swim versus not, or deciding to play spikeball? Have you ever thought about that looking back?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, when I see friends of mine that do swim in college, or friends I swam with in high school, honestly, I talked about how upset I am. Now I'm like, man, I could never get back in the pool and put in the work. I was like, man, what we did was so hard. The work that we put in high school for swimming was so hard. And I kind of joke that I'm grateful that I quit. Obviously, I miss swimming tremendously. I miss the relationships that it gave me. I miss the sport itself. But I don't know, man. I don't know the last time I seriously sat down and thought about it. It would definitely be different. I definitely would have a lot less free time. My life probably would have been a lot more structured. But I don't know. I think that I made the right decision. I know I talked about, well, I don't think I know that I made the right decision. I know I talked about earlier feeling like a failure for multiple years, and that's totally true. I definitely did. I think when I got to the point where I started enjoying spikeball more, and I got better at spikeball, and I realized that it was kind of like where I felt like I was meant to be. I think I also kind of got to a point where, honestly, recently, where I really could reframe what I thought was a failure. And I think that I look back on it, and obviously, like, the result was disappointing, and it's not what I wanted, and it's not what I set out to achieve. It's and it was disappointing, but it certainly wasn't a failure because of all that I got to take away from it. And how much it's made me grow, and how much of a better person and how much of a better athlete it makes me now doing something new.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you were able to reframe that on your own. I mean, I think it takes a lot of people to have that sort of outside perspective. And I do this a lot with athletes, is helping them think about things in a different way, right? A lot of times we will look at ourselves as a failure, or we'll really be hard on ourselves because we weren't able to do something that we thought we should do. And it takes a lot for that athlete to be able to look at it differently and say, hey, you know what? Like, it just didn't work out the way that I expected it to, but look at all the things I've accomplished, otherwise. And it sounds like you've kind of gotten to that point and made peace with it. Now you're really invested in something new that you've gotten really good at. So what are your plans for Spikeball going forward into the future?
Gotcha. Well, like short-term plans, competing in the 2021 SRA, which is Spikeball Round Net Association, in their tour series that started. 10 what they call tour stops, and 3 of them have happened. I played in 2 of them, and I've actually podiumed in the pro division at both of them. I got 3rd in 2 of the first 3, which is super cool to be able to be on a podium at the highest division. But I actually just teamed up with a good buddy of mine from Texas, Grant Laughlin, and we're going to play the rest of the season together as a team. As Outside Smoke will be our team name, and we're going to team up and try to make the pro division at nationals. And we actually will play in our first tour stop together next weekend in July 10th in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and we'll play a couple more tour stops throughout the country for the rest of the summer. And then, like I said, hopefully be competing in the pro division nationals in October.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I wish you guys the best of luck. Last question. If there's one thing or one piece of advice that you could give specifically to any high school athletes out there, what would it be, right? And it could be anything, but maybe looking at it through the lens of making that choice, right? Of whether to move forward and participate in sport in college. Like, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who's in high school now?
Gotcha. The biggest piece of advice that I would definitely give to anybody, and it definitely pertains to athletes, but it really could pertain to anybody about anything, is to not beat yourself up. When things don't go your way. I have always been somebody who has treated myself. I've always been my worst critic. I've always treated myself super harshly. I've always beat myself up about bad performances. And not only beat myself up, just absolutely just beat myself on the ground and don't even let me breathe or live it down. Recently, I know we talked about this when we talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago. I kind of made it like a New Year's resolution for me to not necessarily stop being my biggest critic, because I think that that's important, but reframing the way I critique myself and also becoming my biggest supporter in the same token, of being able to acknowledge like, hey, like, yeah, you made a mistake. Like, you shouldn't have done that. But also being your biggest supporter and being like, man, it's one mistake, and whatever sport it is, there's so many reps that you go through in a game or practice, and like, you're going to make mistakes. And just trusting in yourself, trusting in your game and the skill set that you've developed in your sport, and realize that you are good and you can do what you're setting out to do, as long as you put yourself in the right mental space, and you lift yourself up instead of pushing yourself down. Because if you beat yourself in the ground, you don't even give yourself a fighting chance. If I had been as, I think, positive as I am with myself today, back in high school, my life would be different. And obviously, like I said earlier, I'm glad that my life isn't different. I think I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. But having that positive attitude and just like letting yourself live down the mistakes is huge, and just puts you in a better mindset to be able to think about things, and whether that's thinking about whether you want to go on to play a sport in college or whether you want to quit. If you just treat yourself like you would treat somebody else who made a mistake, you're going to be able to make a much easier decision, and a decision that you're so much more satisfied with. Like I said, I made my decision to quit swimming, and it ate at me. It ate at me for years. I mean, it ate at me for years, and it drove me into the hardest time of my life. If I was able to like look back and be like, man, no, you worked so hard at swimming, and just because you came up short of what this initial goal, this lofty goal that you had set when you were 6 years old, doesn't mean you're a failure. Then I would have gone through a phase like that in college, where I was disappointed with myself or upset with myself or had this kind of messed up notion of what success and failure was. That's
a great way to end, and that's great advice for anybody out there who's listening. So Noah, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. It was great to talk to you. I learned a lot today about you and Spikeball and all the things that you're doing. So this was great. I really appreciate it. And let's stay in touch, and hopefully you can come back on in the future. No, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on. I love getting to talk about this stuff
love getting to talk about Spikeball any chance I can get in. And obviously, I think the mental side of sports is something that is so interesting to me and so important. And I'm super glad you reached out, and we'll absolutely stay in touch. And anytime you want to have me back on, I'll always be down to do that.
Thanks, Noah. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks. You too.
So, what was your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Noah Luskus? For me, it is that there are new opportunities available to competitive athletes that retire from their primary sport, whether by choice or chance. Any athlete that chooses to see opportunity in a major transition can mitigate some of the sadness and anxiety associated with retiring from their primary sport. My suggestion to young athletes is to know that there are ways to remain competitive in college beyond traditional intercollegiate athletics. Trying a new sport or skill in college can create an athletic opportunity that you may have never imagined. I want to thank Noah for his kind generosity and the wisdom he shared with the Freshman Foundation community. You can learn more about Noah on Instagram at Yuckskus, YUCKSKUS. You can learn more about the Freshman Foundation on our website at freshmanfoundation.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back for episode 23.
Mike Huber is the founder and owner of Follow the Ball Coaching, located in Fairhaven, New Jersey. He is a mental performance coach and business advisor dedicated to serving athletes just like you reach their full potential on and off the court. The Freshman Foundation is all about helping you get to the next level. For more information, follow along on Instagram at the Freshman Foundation. Please subscribe, give us a like on iTunes, Spotify, leave a review, tell a friend. Most importantly, come back in 2 weeks, ready to get better.